So for Halloween, we're going to talk about the worst horror story dividend investors can live through: a dividend cut. You lose your capital, you lose your income, and then you get that tiny voice telling you to hold a little bit longer on that stock. 5 years later, you're still in the red and you don't know what to do. Today, I'm going to share 3 tricks I have to avoid dividend cutters, and they're not going to be your typical avoid high payout ratio. At the end of this video, I will also explain my ultimate strategy to make sure that I sell with conviction and most of the time avoid that dividend cut. So we're going to start with trick number 1, trust the market. I know, kind of crazy, right? But there is a reason why a company offers a high yield. And by high yield, I talk about all companies offering a yield above 5%. If we look at Walgreens, for example, we clearly see the relationship between the stock price going down quarter after quarter over the past 3 years versus the yield that keeps going up. So in 2022, we had a yield about 4%, and then quickly in 23, it became a high yield at 5%. What changed? The market is trying to tell you something. It tries to warn you about something because stock prices are just a function of offer and demand. So when there's less demand for a stock, the stock price will drop and therefore the yield will increase. So you have to ask yourself that question: why in the world investors are not interested in investing in Walgreens anymore? When you look at the dividend triangle for Walgreens, you can clearly see that while revenues are increasing a little bit, earnings started to get shaky around 2019, and therefore you see also the dividend growth slowing down. So the market is telling you something, that the business is struggling, that they're having problem, and then it becomes a matter of time until A, management turn things around and then be successful again, or B, management has done a poor job and has to cut the dividends. Now let's move on with trick number 2 that is a little bit more subtle. Avoid companies with an absence of dividend growth. Those companies are actually passively cutting their dividend every year they don't increase your paycheck. Why? Because your buying power is reduced by inflation year over year. So $10,000 10 years ago is not the same thing as today, right? On top of that, it's also the first step toward a dividend cut. Keep in mind that for management, the dividend payment is an expense. It's like paying out debt without a creditor. So at one point, they will choose to strengthen the balance sheet of the company and save it instead of rewarding you or pay for your retirement. In other words, when there's an increase of a dividend, that's a sign of confidence, that's a sign of growth, and that's a sign that the company is healthy. When there's no more dividend increases, it's time to get concerned. If you look at this example for Energex, that is a renewable energy company, it surfed on a huge tailwind on the stock price in 2021, where all renewable stocks were getting a lot of hype. However, if you looked at the dividend triangle and you look at the earnings, you realize that they were shaky at best and actually declining. And that led to a stop of dividend increases for a few years. That should have raised a lot of concern from investors, that then you do a little bit more deep dive analysis and you realize the payout ratio is not there, the growth is not there, the cash flow is not there, and then boom, surprise, we have a dividend cut in 2024. But a high yield and an absence of dividend growth are not the only 2 things you should look for. To avoid dividend cutters, you should focus on the dividend triangle. So study the relationship between the revenue, the earnings per share, and the dividend growth over the past 5 years. Here's an example with Altria, a famous company to pay a high yield and kept on increasing its dividend. So now you have conflicting information. On one side, you have a high yield telling you, oh, I should worry. On the other one, you have a dividend grower, very stable, telling you, well, everything is good. But when you look at the revenue and the earnings, well, the revenues are not growing that much right now, and the earnings are shaky. What does it tell you? Well, the company struggles to find growth vectors. So yes, Altria is a cash flow making machine, but is it enough for the next 10, 15, 20 years? I'm not convinced about that. Plus, you're going to tell me, oh, but Mike, look at what happened in 2024. The stock price keeps going up. Fair enough. Everything is going up in 24. So in other words, a monkey would have made money out of it. So if I had Altria in my portfolio right now, I would do a deep dive and I would be concerned about the future of those dividend increases. Most of the time, a weak dividend triangle in my portfolio will equal to a sell. I'm trying to avoid those dividend cuts before it's too late. Before I share with you my ultimate trick to sell with conviction and not drag onto those companies until they fail me, I want to invite you to my next webinar that will happen on November 28th. In this webinar, I will explain you how a focus on dividend could blind you and put your retirement at risk. I will also share with you the criteria to select high quality dividend growth stocks. Finally, I'm going to present you an example with a retirement portfolio where you can create your own dividend, withdraw money from your portfolio, enjoy retirement stress-free, and don't have to worry about market fluctuation. So register for free. The link is in the description below. I'm going to see you on November 28th. The places are limited to the 500 first registrant attendees for the live session, but all registrant will receive the replay. Now, let's focus on my ultimate trick to avoid dividend cutters and also to sell with conviction. Unfortunately, we cannot avoid all dividend cutters. Even myself, I'm making mistakes, and I got burnt with Algonquin a few years ago. But when I look back at the dividend triangle and I look back at this mistake, I learned the ultimate trick to move on and sell with conviction. I may not avoid all dividend cutters, but at least I'll be able to quickly act and then improve my portfolio. So looking back at Algonquin, as you can see on this graph, the company kept on showing revenue increases, but the earnings per share was quite shaky. A second look at the company's financials would have highlighted the fact that the free cash flow was going down as well. And at one point, the company had no other choices but to cut the dividend. Fortunately for me, I cut after the first dividend cut and did not have to suffer a second one in 24. So what's that ultimate trick? Well, the thing is, I did not look close enough to the dividend triangle for Algonquin and made sure that my investment thesis and the numbers were making sense together. So the ultimate trick is when you look at a company's fundamentals, you ensure that those numbers are backing up your investment thesis. So here's an example with Magna International that I sold a few months ago. For this one, I still have a very strong investment thesis. I still love Magna International. It's one of the largest auto part makers in the world. They're making so many different parts that they could build their own cars. They have a sticky business, building long-term relationship with car makers, evolving with them, inking several deals with electric vehicle manufacturers as well. But when you put all of this and you get very excited, when you look at the numbers, you can see that the revenue are not always increasing. You can see that the earnings are shaky. That tells me that the company has problem maintaining healthy margin, and then the dividend has slowed down. So it's not about to cut it anytime soon, but after a few years, I was patient, I waited, and I realized that the numbers did not back the reasons why I wanted to have Magna International in my portfolio. So I sold, I made a little bit of money, not too much. I should have invested in something better, but I was able to move on and then reallocate that money elsewhere into a company that has a strong dividend triangle and where I have several reasons to invest in it. So again, if you want to know more about how to invest with conviction and build a portfolio providing that dividend income for life, you can join the webinar on the link description below. It's going to be free live. I'm going to answer all your questions on November 28th. You can also watch the replay whenever you want. And before we go, don't forget to give me a thumbs up, like this channel, and share it with other friends. I'm going to see you in the comments about dividend cutters. And until then, the next video, don't forget to stay invested.